Namaskar. Well, friends, let me heartily welcome you all to Bhim Bhashya, my audio-visual podcast series on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. This audio-visual podcast series has 54 short speeches on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of his multifaceted genius. Well, friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision that he had seen for our nation. That is what this podcast series is all about. So let's proceed. Well, friends, beginning with this episode, in the next 8 episodes, I am going to present Dr. Ambedkar's unique contribution as the principal architect of the Indian Constitution. In this particular episode, episode 39, I am going to talk about the long-drawn process of constitutional reforms in our country and Dr. Ambedkar's participation in this process. The Constitution of India was adopted on 26th November 1949 and India became a republic on 26th January 1950. But do you know that the constitution making in India began way back in the year 1895? In fact, there were two parallel efforts, one by the British government and the other by our own leaders and legal luminaries. The earliest Indian attempt for making a constitution for India was in the form of Constitution of India Bill of 1895. It was also called the Swaraj Bill because Annie Besant suggested that this bill was inspired by Lokmanya Tilak. The Swaraj Bill presented the first constitutional vision for India. The bill was couched in a legal framework with 110 articles. According to this bill, the Constitution of India was to be divided into 4 different powers. First, sovereign power. Second, legislative power. Third, judicial power. And fourth, executive power. All these powers were to be vested in the Parliament of India. The proposed Constitution of 1895 also laid down a number of citizen rights, including freedom of expression, right to property, equality before law, and right to bear arms. Interestingly, compulsory primary education as well as state free education were also included as a part of the Constitution. The stream of British efforts at constitutional reforms began with the Government of India Act of 1919. The Southborough Committee on Franchise was appointed by the British government in the year 1919. Precisely at that time, as the destiny would have it, Dr. Ambedkar returned to India temporarily, discontinuing his higher education abroad. Dr. Ambedkar seized that opportunity and made a submission before the Southborough Committee, and it was no ordinary submission. Dr. Ambedkar emphasized the idea of widening of electorate. He actively promoted universal adult franchise so that every person has an equal opportunity to participate in the government. It was an idea way ahead of its time. When did women get voting rights in a free country like United States? It was in 1920. And here was a young scholar, Bhim Ambedkar, suggesting movement towards universal adult franchise 1 year before even that. And that too when the country was ruled by foreign powers. Then in 1925, another Indian draft called the Commonwealth of India Bill was presented. The Commonwealth of India Bill of 1925 was initially drafted in April 1924 by the National Convention, which was chaired by Tej Bahadur Sapru. The draft bill was submitted by All Parties Conference in 1925, which was chaired by Ms. Annie Besant. A number of amendments were made, and then the bill was finalized by the National Convention in April 1925. The Commonwealth of India Bill of 1925 was a full-fledged constitution consisting of 127 articles divided into 10 chapters. Importantly, there was a section on fundamental rights, which included, among other things, freedom of expression, gender equality, non-discrimination, and the right to elementary education, much the same way as it was done in the Swaraj Bill of 1895. Notably, however, most of these fundamental rights were subject to restrictions. The bill also proposed to place limits on the franchise by prescribing qualifications based on income, land ownership, literacy, and education levels. The bill was presented to the British Parliament by one of the then Labour Party members in December 1925. It, however, failed to pass through the British Parliament because the Labour Party was defeated in the elections in Britain. In 1927, then came Simon Commission that was sent to India by the British. It was opposed and protested against because it had no Indian representation. British at that time challenged the Indian people to formulate our own constitution, and this led to the third Indian attempt, and that is in the form of Motilal Nehru Committee report of 1928. In May 1928, a committee was set up under the chairmanship of Motilal Nehru with, interestingly, Jawaharlal Nehru as its secretary. Members of this committee included Subhash Chandra Bose and Tej Bahadur Sapru. The report of the committee, submitted on the 10th August 1928, is referred to as the Motilal Nehru Report. The Motilal Nehru Report essentially proposed a dominion status of complete internal self-government for India. Secondly, a federal setup of government. Third, elections under universal suffrage. Four, a Bill of Rights, that is fundamental rights. While the Motilal Nehru Committee report was appreciated by several experts, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar was highly critical of this report on the following grounds. First, while the Nehru Committee consulted all minorities, they did not consult the depressed class groups. In fact, the report stated, "We have not made any special provision for the representation of the depressed classes in the legislature." While Motilal Nehru Committee had listed a set of fundamental rights, Dr. Ambedkar argued that no declaration of rights, however comprehensive it is in its scope and however clear in its terms and tenor, can ensure the enjoyment of those rights. The guarantee of a right consists not in its declaration, but in the provision of a remedy for its enforcement in case it is violated. Motilal Nehru Committee's report does not even have an appeal clause against the infringement of the fundamental rights. The guarantee, Dr. Ambedkar argued, given in the Motilal Nehru Constitution is therefore quite illusory. Today, we know it as an Article 32 in the Indian Constitution, which Dr. Ambedkar had called the heart and soul of the Indian Constitution because it provides a constitutional remedy for violation of fundamental rights. It is generally considered that despite its merit, the Motilal Nehru Committee report had practically very little influence on constitution making. The next attempt at constitution making came from the British side. After the three roundtable conferences that were held in London, the first, as we know, was boycotted by Congress. The second one was marked by a heated exchange between Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar over the issue of separate electorates for the depressed classes. Later, this led to a communal award, announcement of communal award by the British in favor of Dr. Ambedkar. This was followed by a fast unto death by Mahatma Gandhi and eventually a compromise between the two in the form of Pune Pact of 1932. This was followed by a series of constitutional reforms, Government of India Act of 1935, then the Cripps Mission 1942, the Sapru Committee, which was in Indian effort in 1945, and finally the Cabinet Mission of 1946. The most notable among these was the Government of India Act of 1935. Dr. Ambedkar was also critical of all the other efforts that were made by the Cripps Mission in 1942, Sapru Committee in 1945. Sapru Committee report was actually a good one, but nobody paid any attention to it, including the Congress Party. And finally, the Cabinet Mission of 1946. So Dr. Ambedkar was a witness and participant in all these efforts. In fact, if you look at all the constitutional reform efforts in India, excluding the first one, which was in 1895, on all other counts, in every effort made by the Indian leaders or by the British government, who was one leader from India who was part of it, one who was involved in it, one who participated in that, one who was critical about it. It was not Mahatma Gandhi, it was not Jawaharlal Nehru, it was not Sardar Patel, it was none other than Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. So even before the Constitution of India was finally written, all the efforts, excluding the first one, 1895, because at that time Dr. Ambedkar was 4-year old. Other than that, all efforts have an imprint of the influence of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And this was just the prelude to making of the final constitution. Well, friends, we can conclude our session right here. But before I leave, I would like to request you that if you like this audio-visual podcast series, please like it, please share it, please subscribe to it. So long until we meet again. Thank you. Namaskar.